Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the MSI GeForce RTX 3080 Suprim X 10G. This is a beautiful card from MSI, and this is an unboxing video to talk to you about what the 3080 is like to use, what you get in the box, the various highlights of it, and the features and facets of this card, as well as talking about how you vertically mount it, the highlights of the design, giving you benchmark details and performance chat, and also just talking about how glorious the 3080 is. Now, this is a review sample that was sent for me for testing. I haven't managed to get hold of one myself, but I am able to talk to you about what it's like to use compared to the 2080 Ti that I was using previously. Now, this is an interesting card for a number of different reasons, not least of which is that fantastic design, but it also has the power that you'd expect from a 3080, including 10 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, 1905 megahertz memory speed and boost clock, and it also comes with a MSI mouse mat included in the box, as well as this little pole that I'll talk to you about a bit later on. This GPU is interesting because it has a number of really nice design aesthetics to it. Firstly, it's designed with MSI's TRI FROZR 2S thermal design, which means that it not only has really high quality precision machined heat pipes, but also a fantastically thought out heatsink and airflow design, which is designed to keep it cool and running quiet. And the biggest highlight of that is that it has a silent mode whereby the card will run without the fans spinning, so that when it's not under a great deal of strain, you're not running games at maximum performance, you'll find that the fans just won't spin, and that 0 RPM mode essentially means that this card will run incredibly quietly. It also has a dedicated gaming and silent mode in a twin BIOS setup, which allows you to switch between those two performance modes from a hardware button on the GPU, and I'll show you that a bit later on. As you can see, it also has 3 DisplayPort outputs and an HDMI output which supports up to 4K at 120 Hz refresh rate. Those DisplayPorts are 1.4A and the HDMI is 2.1. So you've got plenty of connection options. For reference, I'm running it on Samsung's Odyssey G9 for the most part, and if you don't know what that is, I'd recommend checking out that video. I'll link to it in the description. It's a fantastic ultra-wide 49-inch gaming monitor, and so I require quite a lot of power to run games like Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm going to be discussing the performance of that a bit later on. Now, one thing that struck me about the RTX 3080 is not only the design aesthetic of it, because what you can see is a fantastic look and feel with a brushed aluminium backplate and this sort of 2-color design that split the line straight down the middle of it. You also see the exposed brains of the GPU on that backplate, and that has a really nice look to it. Unusual attention to detail, precision. It all looks and feels fantastic. Look at that close-up view of the circuitry, and it looks really nice. It also speaks volumes to the overall quality of the thing itself. That backplate is a really solid piece of work, and the design is built with a structure that will hold it in place and keep things looking good for years to come with any luck. Now, it's also precision machined with heat pipes that are designed to ensure a good spread of that heat and keep it cool, which means that it is a chunky beast, as you'll see. I'm going to compare it in a minute with the 2080 Ti, and you'll see the fins here. Now, please note they are slightly bent. That wasn't me. This is a review unit that's come for testing. It's come from other people. It's been used before, and it is unfortunately going to have to be returned. However, what you'll see is a really thick and chunky beast. Another thing of note is that you need 3 8-pin PCIe power connectors, so this thing requires quite a lot of power cables plugged into it. That's one more lot than the RTX 2080 Ti as well, which surprised me when I got it out of the box. But it is a standard connection, unlike the Nvidia Founders Edition, so it means it's easy to plug in. A close-up view here, and you'll also see that gaming and silent switch that I was talking about near the power unit. If you have the GPU installed in a case where you can easily take that side panel off, you can easily switch between the gaming and silent BIOS modes. Now the gaming mode obviously gives you maximum performance. The silent one keeps things running as cool and quiet as possible without being obnoxious. It is, however, worth noting that the GPU will still run quietly and with the fans on that 0 RPM mode that I was talking about, even when it is set to gaming mode. So just because you flick that switch to gaming doesn't mean you're suddenly going to have terrible loud fans all the time, but it does mean that when it's in that mode you can get maximum performance. Another highlight that I really like that you've probably seen already is on the back plate you have the MSI Dragon logo. That's kind of laser etched into that backing, and there's some RGB lighting around it that I'll show you later on. Another thing they've done is, as well as having a very solidly built backplate, MSI has also included a strengthening bar here that runs along the top, which is designed to reduce GPU sag and keep the card looking solid and straight over time. What I found is that card, it sits nicely even in the standard position, mounted in a fantastic way. Now the other highlights to the design of the MSI 3080 is the TORX Fans setups. These are designed so the blades work together in pairs to blow air through and focus the air pressure, keeping that GPU cool and cooling the heatsink as much as possible. Thick, as you've seen, nickel plated copper base plate and heat pipes ensure that you have a really good cooling, and you can actually see, as you'll see later on, the heat pipes through the middle of the card if you have some backlighting within your case. Now another thing that comes alongside that bracket that is fitted on the case, you also have this pole that I showed earlier on. This is essentially a stand that you can use if you happen to have a case that will fit in. You can put this stand in your case and put it at one end of the GPU to then hold it up and prevent sag. That obviously keeps the GPU at a certain angle so it's straight all the time. So if you're worried or if you find that the GPU is sagging, this is a nice and easy addition to install in your case. As you see, the pole just screws into the bottom, and then you put the top bracket in the right position to be able to hold that GPU in. Here I'm just doing it to show you what that's like outside the case, but as I'll show you in a minute, I actually had problems when I installed it in the Lee Dynamic XL because I have bottom mounted fans in that case, so there's actually nowhere logical to put the foot for the base of this stand, which is a bit of a shame. You also, when you're installing it, have to think about where the GPU is going to sit and not interfering with the fans, so your positions are kind of limited in that way as to where you can put it. However, as you've seen, at the top of it is just a rubber mount, so it's not too terrible and it's not going to get in the way, or it doesn't connect directly to the card just sits on top of it. Now here I am taking out my 2080 Ti from the Lee Dynamic XL case that I usually use, and you'll see the difference in the size between these two cards. Not only is the 3080 significantly larger, it also requires 3 power connectors where the 2080 only had 2, and it's both thicker and longer than the previous card that I was using. It has a lot more girth to it and it's a bit of a chunky monkey. However, it also is very nice looking. I really like the Founders Edition cards from Nvidia, but there's a lot to say about the Suprim. It has a really nice look and feel to it with that brushed aluminium finish. Little MSI Dragon logos on the fans also set it off nicely in my opinion. That back plate with the RGB on it, as well, as you'll see later on. Another thing this card has going for it is that RGB lighting. One of the things you'll see as we go through is it has RGB next to the fan, so you can just about see it here. You'll see more of it, and along the side plate as well, so you'll see that once it's installed. But you can see just how large it is. Now in a mid-tower or full tower case you probably won't have any problems, but it is a bit of a chunky monkey, so it's worth bearing in mind depending on if you have a smaller case or not. Now I'm going to leave all the specifications including dimensions and such in the description, so be sure to check that out. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to benchmark it, and I'll include benchmarks in the description with standard gameplay and with 3D Mark, Heaven benchmark and other things. But I'm also going to vertically mount it in the Corsair Airflow 5000D and compare the performance of it in standard mounting and vertical mounting. So if you're interested in that, please come back and check that out in the near future. But here you can see was what I was talking about with that stand. So I have 3 fans set to intake and blow air on the GPU from below in this case, and obviously there's nowhere for the bottom of that stand to sit, although in an ideal world it would sit up this end. I literally can't put it there because the fans are in the way. You could perhaps remove one of those fans and only have 2 fans, or maybe if I had 2 140mm there might be enough space, but as it is, it wouldn't fit there without sitting on top of one of the fans, which is obviously not ideal. However, I don't feel like it's 100% necessary anyway. There's not a great deal of sag to it. I feel like that support bracket keeps it nicely in place and it looks nice and straight. The more particular among you might disagree with me, and this angle here probably doesn't do it justice because it was slightly wonky, but as you can see in the Corsair 5000D airflow, it is possible to put this bracket down if you so wish, because the stand just sits at the front in this little recess and then holds the GPU up, and also has that Suprim logo on it as well. Please don't pick holes in my power supply cables. They were not perfect on purpose because I don't plan to keep the GPU in there. I'm also doing vertical testing, and as I said, the GPU's got to go back. But here you can see it again in the Dynamic XL, and you'll see you have a lot of power cables going on there, so it's worth having premium good quality cables because you're going to have a lot of cables on display. Those are Corsair's premium sleeved PSU cables, and they look really nice in my mind. And you can see some of the RGB lighting here. So you see around the Suprim GeForce RTX logos, you'll see there's a bit of RGB lighting that runs across there from the front of the card. Basically it runs the majority of the way across, and you can adjust that within MSI's Dragon Center software. And if you're running an MSI motherboard like I am, then I'm happy to report that you can connect that up and use MSI's software to ensure you have lighting across both of those. And here you can see a close-up view of that backplate again, and you'll see what I was talking about with the MSI Dragon on there glowing nicely, and it really looks fantastic. The level and attention to detail on this card does it a lot of justice. You can see the detail on that Dragon, but also on the brushed aluminium backplate, on the various different accents, on the fans themselves, the way the fins are set up, the logos on there. I feel like you're paying a premium probably for this card if you manage to get hold of one. Obviously they're difficult to get hold of, but it does look the part. It also performs really well, and I'm about to dive into that performance and talk to you a bit more about it. I did a separate video on the Corsair 5000D airflow if you're interested in checking that out and going into depth on that. And while doing that, I tested it on a number of games. I also ran 3D Mark and PC Mark and got some benchmarks for that, and I'll talk to you a bit about how that performed. But here you can see it alongside Corsair's Elite Capitalix cooler, and as you'll see, that is running at 0 RPM mode as well, where the fans don't spin if they're not required. Now the GPU does the same thing, which means that you could potentially run your case really quietly, which is very satisfying. Now here's some footage captured while playing Hitman 3 on maximum settings. This is 1440p and it is basically on a 27-inch monitor, but you can see it was running somewhere between 140 and 180. It varies depending on the scenes, FPS, and this doesn't have ray tracing at this point, but as you can see, it is a beautiful looking game and very fun to play, but it also has a really good performance to it. So if you have a fast refresh monitor and you want to make the most of the 3080, it is possible to do. You are able to get very high FPS out of it. However, I ran it through Heaven Benchmark, PC Mark and 3D Mark on the maximum settings and experienced some different results. So for example, on Heaven, I was running it on my 49-inch with the resolution set to full. It's 5120 by 1440. And that gave me 73 FPS in Heaven with everything maxed out, which by the way is pretty taxing. Times by Extreme, we're looking at 160 plus FPS recommended for Battlefield 5, and times by Ultra is 145 FPS, but when I ran Hitman 3's benchmark, it said I'd get 30 FPS at that maximum setting, so that was interesting. I'll leave links to the benchmarks in the description so you can check them out. But one thing that I have noted is Cyberpunk 2077 runs about somewhere between 10 and 20 FPS higher than it did with the 2080 Ti, and that is a very taxing game indeed. Now here you can see within MSI's Dragon Center software that you can adjust the RGB lighting. You can choose from a number of different styles. You can adjust the speed and the brightness, and also you can take advantage of MSI's Mystic Light Link software capabilities, which basically allows you to match up the RGB lighting on your GPU with that of the motherboard. You can also set it so that it will match up with Corsair's lighting if you're using the J-Rainbow connection, for example, on your motherboard. You can also maximize your RGB lighting that way, and you'll note there's ambient link, which allows it to connect with Nanoleaf and Philips Hue lighting, so you can get RGB lighting through there. But you can see some of the RGB lighting here, and you also note how you're basically missing out on it unless you vertically mount it, because yes, you have that side lighting that you can see here through the glass and enjoy, and yes, you'll be able to see the dragon lit up on the back plate, which actually is one of my favorite bits of the card, but you can't see the lighting around the fans. So if you have it installed in the standard position, that RGB lighting on the bottom underneath where the fans are is basically pointless because you can't see it unless you lay on the floor and look up at your case or something. But if you want to make the most of that, you'll have to mount it in the vertical position. But then if you mount it vertically, you don't get to see the glory of the back plate, which I feel is a bit of a shame. So I'm going to do a separate video with it mounted vertically in the 5000D airflow, and a comparison to see what the difference in performance is like, what the impact is on the heat and the FPS from this, because you'd imagine, look how close it is to the glass, that it's going to run a lot hotter. So if you're interested, come back for that. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hope you found it useful, interesting, hilarious, or all of the above. Be sure to check out the description for other information you might find interesting, and subscribe and watch these other videos as well that I think might be useful to you, and have a great life.